Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, AlbyMTG, and today I'll be bringing you guys a budget standard deck for M19 standard. We're working with a $50 budget here. I feel like that's reasonable enough for a standard deck in comparison to some of the $400, $500, maybe even $600 standard decks that you might be playing with. Karns are real expensive, Nicol Bolas is real expensive, Teferi is expensive, so we're not going to be playing with any of those cards. We're going to keep it nice and low on the wallet and still have a pretty fun, pretty sweet deck to play with. So I call this one with the Colossus, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So this deck formed as soon as I saw One with the Machine get spoiled for M19. This card just works so well with Metalwork Colossus. One with the Machine basically reads 4 mana, draw 11 cards if we have a Metalwork Colossus in play, and so the entire deck is just basically built around getting out a cheap Metalwork Colossus, maybe even multiple Colossi, and then having our opponents just kind of die to those, and we'll draw additional cards with the One with the Machines to make sure that our opponents do not survive Metalwork Colossus very long. We can use this to draw into additional artifacts as well that we can sack to bring back our Metalwork Colossus if they end up managing to destroy it or something like that, with like an Abrade, for example. The activated ability from Metalwork Colossus ends up being very nice in this deck because it turns some of our artifacts that aren't necessarily great against certain opponents into possible ways of recurring a 10-10, which is just super cool. And then we're only running 2 copies of One with the Machine here because I figured once we draw 11 cards should be enough for us to win the game. So we don't need to be running 4 copies of One with the Machine. We don't need to get overly repetitive and draw out too many cards with One with the Machine. We should be more than happy to just draw 11 and then win from there. So I wanted to make the Metalwork Colossus as cheap as possible, and so that led me to starting with Gilded Lotus and Power Stone Shard. Gilded Lotus basically takes up 8 mana worth of the cost of a Metalwork Colossus. It takes care of 5 of the non-creature cost, or non-creature converted mana cost, and then it takes up 3 by just tapping itself, so that's 8 of our 11 already for Metalwork Colossus, which is very nice. And then Power Stone Shard, again, just another way for us to produce a little bit of mana, can jump us from 3 to 5, which can be super nice in this deck because we have a lot of 5-drops like the Gilded Lotus, for example, and some other cards that you're going to see later on in this video. And 5 is like a common turn for us to get out Metalwork Colossus. 5, 6, those are normally when we'll be able to have out the Metalwork Colossus. That might not seem super impressive, but the turns where we're getting Metalwork Colossus down, we're also getting additional things down, like maybe holding up Spell Pierce back up or doing something like that as well on turns 5 and 6 for Metalwork Colossus. And then we have some of the vehicles in this deck. Vehicles are non-creature spells, which means that they count towards the Metalwork Colossus reduction as long as they are not currently crewed, meaning Aethersphere Harvester and Sky Sovereign Console Flagship can get in the deck. Aethersphere Harvester is very nice against the mono-red matchups, and we have a lot of 1-power creatures that can crew up the Aethersphere Harvester. And then Sky Sovereign is also nice because it acts as an additional win condition, being a 6-power flyer, and because we are just a mono-blue deck with a bunch of colorless spells, we don't really have access to any removal. So Sky Sovereign Console Flagship acts as at least a little bit of a removal spell, being able to deal 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker when it enters the battlefield or attacks. After these, we're going to look at some of the creatures that we have to crew up these vehicles, or to just synergize nicely with the other artifacts that we have. 4 copies of Glintnest Crane, 1 copy of Psy Master Thopterus, and 2 copies of Sage of Lot Nam. The Glintnest Cranes just kind of seemed like a no-brainer. They're quite good. Psy Master Thopterus also seems quite good. The only problem I saw with Psy was that he is a legendary creature, so we only have 1 copy of him in the main board, and we have a lot of other things that we kind of want to cast that are 3 mana, so Psy maybe not the best 3-drop for the deck, but in the late game, again, it can provide us with another win condition, being the fact that it makes the Thopter tokens. Then we can just beat down our opponents with Thopter tokens. It also turns some of our late game artifacts that maybe like the Gilded Lotus and the Power Stone Shard that I showed you guys earlier. It can turn those into 1/1 flyers to at least keep us alive a little bit longer in the game and try and find a Metalwork Colossus. And then Sage of Lot Nam, this card used to be a rare, so it is powerful. If we can just sacrifice some of the artifacts that don't necessarily mean a whole lot to us anymore in the game, some of the early drops, something like a Renegade map, where that'll be on the next page that I'll talk about that. But it's the kind of card that you want to play early on in the game, and then it has no use later in the game, and so Sage of Lot Nam can turn that card into an additional card that we get to draw, instead of just being kind of a useless artifact just sitting there. And so, like I said, talking about some of the artifacts here, these are 9 of our 1-drop artifacts, 4 copies of Renegade Map, 1 copy of Sentinel Totem, 4 copies of Fountain of Renewal. Fountain of Renewal is a new card here from M19. At the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 1 life, so this can be nice as a good start for the matchup against Mono Red or just any of the aggressive decks in general. And then later in the game, even if we don't have out a Sage of Lan Nam or a Sai to sacrifice the Fountain of Renewal, we can still just pay 3 mana, sacrifice it, and draw a card, which is super cool. Renegade Map, very good in the early game, allows us to make sure that we're hitting our land drops, and then in the late game we can just sack it to draw another card from Sage of Lan Nam, or we can sack it to bring back a Metalwork Colossus later on as well. And then Sentinel Totem here enters the battlefield, scry 1, we're not overly worried about that. It's here as a main board way to deal with graveyards a little bit. The Scarab God is still an extremely powerful card, and so it would feel kind of wrong to not have at least one main board answer to graveyards with how good the Scarab God is right now, because we're not playing any removal either for the Scarab God, so the Scarab God can just take over the game, so Sentinel Totem kind of a necessity here for this list. Next we have the 2-drop artifacts, 4 copies of Servo Schematic and 1 copy of Sorcerous Spyglass. This is a $50 deck tech like I said before, and Sorcerous Spyglass is actually the most expensive card in the deck at about $4 to $5, somewhere in there. Sorcerous Spyglass again can name Scarab God, can name some of the Planeswalkers that we're not very good against, cards like Teferi and Karn. And then Servo Schematic allows us to create a Servo token, so we get to stay alive earlier on, maybe get in for a few points of damage with it, but it also is a non-creature artifact that costs 2, so it reduces our Metalwork Colossus by 2, and then later on in the game, if we're sacking it to draw cards, then we're going to make a servo off of the, if it is put into a graveyard trigger, or we can sacrifice it to bring back a Metalwork Colossus, and again, make a servo token because of the enters the graveyard trigger. Then we have the final cards that are non-lands in the main deck, and that is 2 copies of the Antiquities War and 1 copy of Spell Pierce. The Spell Pierce gives us at least a little bit of interaction since we're extremely light on interaction, and then the Antiquities War is again an alternative win condition and just another way for us to find Metalwork Colossus. So it works as both of those, which is super nice in the deck. And then we are on to the mana base. We're looking at 2 copies of Memorial to Genius, 14 Islands, and 1 Ipnu Rivulet in terms of blue mana producing lands. Memorial to Genius, I can't say no to a utility land that's going to draw me cards. 14 basic islands, simple enough. And then 1 Ipnu Rivulet, this card can sometimes do more than what you would think it would. Maybe if we're late in the game and we still haven't hit a Colossus, but we have a bunch of artifacts on the field, we can mill ourselves with the Ipnu Rivulet, try and put some Metalwork Colossi in the graveyard, and then return them back to our hand with the activated ability on Metalwork Colossus. We can use this to try and mill our opponent's Approach of the Second Sun. If we know that they have an approach near the top of their deck, then Ipnu Rivulet's a nice way of dealing with that as well, since we're not really playing any counter magic outside of the 1 Spell Pierce in the main. So that's pretty much it for the blue mana, and then for colorless mana we have 2 Inventor's Fair here. Inventor's Fair, we're going to have enough artifacts to be able to gain the life pretty consistently with Inventor's Fair on our upkeep, but then we also have the ability to sacrifice it and search for a Metalwork Colossus if we need to, and then 1 copy of Reliquary Tower, because again, I wanted to draw 11 cards, and if I want to draw 11 cards, I want to keep my 11 cards, so Reliquary Tower, just kind of a free land for us to throw in here. It doesn't really hurt us too much to include it in this deck because we are only 1 color, so allowing us to have no maximum hand size after we draw 11 cards can sometimes be pretty solid. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the sideboard. Of course, sideboards vary by your meta. If you're playing in a very red-heavy meta, you might want to sideboard one way versus if you're playing in a very control-heavy meta. But the sideboard I created here was just for kind of your typical Magic the Gathering online meta, the kind of decks that you can expect to see there. So these are the 15 cards that I chose for just kind of an overall basis of a sideboard. And we're starting with a nice little creature plan here, which is 4 copies of Skilled Animator, 2 Zahid, and 1 more copy of Sai. Remember, we had the 1 Sai in the main board already as well. This allows us to get a little bit more aggressive and try and beat down our opponents with some creatures. We have very efficient creatures here. Skilled Animator being 3 mana for 6 power and 8 toughness is super nice. Even if they kill the Skilled Animator, we're not super upset. Like, they kill their 3-drop, it's not the biggest deal, but if they can't kill our 3-drop, like if they're mono green, for example, then we have a 5/5 that can trade with their Steel Leaf Champion, when normally we wouldn't be able to trade with a Steel Leaf Champion, and we would just be dying to it instead. So Skilled Animator can be super helpful in that matchup. Zahid, again, just a nice little flyer. This guy can end the games very quickly. And then Sai, if we're expecting the games to go long and grindy, then being able to create Thopter tokens off of casting artifact spells can be very nice from Sai. Then we're looking at 3 copies of Negate, 1 copy of Commit to Memory, and 1 copy of River's Rebuke. Negates are just kind of what you would expect. All blue decks should probably be running some number of Negate in their sideboard unless they're already running them in the main. It's just an extremely efficient card and just a very good card overall. Commit to Memory is kind of an interesting card as well. Synergizes again with the Ipnu Rivulet that we had. We can go ahead and put something on top of their library, or a second from the top, sorry, and then we can mill it with the Ipnu Rivulet that we're running, and then just kind of nice against Teferi. It gives us, even if we're on the play, or even if we're on the draw, it gives us an answer to a turn 5 Teferi. We can go ahead and just commit it to give ourselves a few more turns. River's Rebuke kind of seems like game over for the mono green opponents. Just a nice way of removing all the stuff that they have, and then needing them to take additional turns, maybe 2 to 3 turns, just to rebuild the board state that they have at sometimes. And then even for like Paradoxical Outcome or the Mirrors, then River's Rebuke is also like fine against that too, and you're not super upset about it, needing them to recast the Aetherflux Reservoirs and all their other Mana Rocks, Prophetic Prisms, those kind of things. Then finally, we have 2 copies of Sorcerous Spyglass here to end things out, as well as 1 Sentinel Totem. These are the artifacts in our sideboard. Sorcerous Spyglass we talked about earlier, and Sentinel Totem we talked about earlier as well. So you're going to bring them in against the matchups where they're good. Sorcerous Spyglass again, the Scarab God, vehicles, planeswalkers, those kind of things. And then Sentinel Totem, again, the Scarab God. It's a very scary card, and so Sentinel Totem is a nice way of giving us some graveyard hate against the Scarab God. So here you guys can see the deck breakdown here on mtggoldfish.com. 13.78 tickets on Magic Online, $48.62 in paper, and you could have yourself one with the Colossus by AlbyMTG. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you guys did enjoy it, a like would be very much appreciated. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, and let me know your thoughts on the deck down low in the comment section. I, of course, love hearing from you guys, and that's pretty much all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I'll see you guys next time for another Magic the Gathering video.